Well, hello, and thank you so much for joining us for optimizing online engagement for local governments with MetroQuest. It's great to have so many people on the line today, and we're really excited to offer today's program. Normally, we try to feature our case study presenters mostly in our webinars, and today's an opportunity to respond to the many requests that we get for a little bit more in-depth information about MetroQuest and how to optimize online engagement for maximum success. So stay tuned for that. My name is Dave Biggs, and I'm the Chief Engagement Officer here at MetroQuest, and I'm pleased to host today's webinar. I'd like to begin with the agenda for the day. Local government's top priorities for public engagement is going to be our first topic, where we're really going to dive into what we have learned over the many years in doing this from local governments in terms of what they need to achieve in order to have success on their public engagement. And then I'm going to speak to how we have taken that information from local governments to optimize a tool specifically for those needs to meet those goals. And then I'm going to give you a short demonstration of the three phases to setting up a survey with MetroQuest very quickly, and then we're going to open it up for any questions that remain for you. So if you look in the go-to webinar panel, there's a question box. Feel free at any time during the webinar to ask a question. We'll get to as many of those as possible at the end of the webinar. So to begin with, we at MetroQuest are very involved with many associations across the country and around the world in planning roles, transportation and urban planning, but also public engagement organizations. And we really focus on developing and delivering training for best practices. And that gives us a great vantage point to look across the industry in what's working best. And we also roll those lessons into our own tool and into our own software, MetroQuest. And we also, because we're working directly with organizations that are using the software, we have a great vantage point to kind of see what they're doing to enhance their public engagement using online tools. And so it's a pleasure to kind of summarize what we've learned over the years today. So with respect to top public engagement goals, here is what we hear as sort of criteria that agencies are under in order to deem their public engagement a success. The first one is critical mass. They need to demonstrate to the community and to decision makers that they have enough people involved in the public engagement process to make claims over what they've heard and how it influenced the outcome. Secondly, there needs to be a diversity of voices across all demographics in the community. Those are really about the quantitative, how many people are being engaged. But there's also some qualitative criteria, such as informed input. Planning issues that our agencies are facing are complicated, and we need to have confidence that the information coming in is informed about the trade-offs and nuances around the planning issues. And that can be challenging with respect to, the gulf between what the public spends its time thinking about and what planners spend their time thinking about. And lastly, because we've had a kind of a history of collecting comments in public involvement, it's important that the vast majority of the information coming in can be quantifiable, so decision makers can summarize what the public has said. It's very difficult to do unless there's quantifiable results coming out of the process. And with those four goals together, it's really that pinpoint in the middle of it that we're targeting to provide excellence in public engagement. And when those aspects come together, we feel that it's a strong way to improve both decision making, but also public support for plans going forward. So I'm going to talk today about three local government success stories and the challenges that we're facing and how they achieved success overcoming those challenges. The first one that I want to mention is the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan, which was an excellent example not only of dealing with a fairly complicated topic, multiple different modes of travel, long-range plans for transforming Austin's transportation system, but it was also a really strong goal in their public engagement process to engage a diverse population, because Austin is a very diverse city. And so in the past, they haven't achieved those results. And so they were really setting out to achieve the diversity of public engagement. And I'm happy to report that when you look at the demographics of who they engaged, it actually matches almost perfectly the age and ethnic mix of Austin. And so that was the first time for them. So there were some great successes there, and I'll talk a little bit about how they achieved that. The second one I'm going to highlight is the Fairfax County Corridor Plan, which it was a particular challenge because, let's face it, the public doesn't think about corridor planning on a regular basis, and it's difficult to engage the public on some of these issues that planners are facing. They did a fantastic job engaging over 15,000 people in this corridor planning process. The other thing that they did was they collected really valuable and informed feedback by structuring the questions in an interesting way, so people were learning about what's at stake and what the options are along the way. And then the last one I'm going to highlight was a contentious project where they were facing a bridge replacement in a relatively small community, and they had been fighting or bickering over this bridge replacement for about 15 years. And so they used MetroQuest to try to harmonize the results. And I'm not going to spoil the ending here. I'm going to share those results at the end. But they were facing a lot of controversy, and the way they structured the type of questions they were asking and how they were presenting those options was really a key to their success. So now over to how have we taken those kind of challenges and baked them into MetroQuest to optimize for those successes. So the first category is critical mass, as I mentioned, and achieving a result like this, where, for example, there's 15,000 people that were engaged, is something that we've really optimized over the years, the tool to support the most people engaged possible, using a diverse series of strategies, as you'll see. And you can look at this pattern of engagement over this just a little bit over a month. This engagement took place. You can see it starts off gradually, and then it kind of picks up. People start sharing it. Maybe a blogger picks it up, and it accelerates into high gear. And then there's some different events along the way that might kick it up to the next level. And so that really speaks to how it's shareable, how interesting it is for people to share it, but also the promotional program that's behind it. Now, it's so important to be multi-channel. Let's face it, people are accessing the internet on all kinds of different devices, and it's important to support each one of them in a really comfortable and an interesting way. And increasingly, it's all about mobile, a mobile-first kind of approach to designing an interface which presents things in an interesting and comfortable way on those small screens that people are carrying around with them everywhere is so important. We find that that many projects have over 50% of their participation using mobile devices. It's important, especially for controversial projects, that the experience feels private to people, that they don't feel like other people are going to criticize them for saying what they want to say. And so we've really spent a lot of time at MetroQuest making it feel comfortable for people to express their views without fear of intimidation or biasing. The other thing is you have a budget we found for about 5 minutes of people's time. And so it's important to really make the best use of that 5 minutes as you can. And so we found that if you ask for much more than that, the participation drops off dramatically. So it's important really to get that 5-minute experience right. With respect to diversity, there's a whole number of things that come into play in terms of engaging beyond the usual suspects, the people that kind of show up for everything. There's a number of elements that we found make a really big difference. The first one is to use visuals where you can. It keeps people moving quickly, it makes it more enjoyable, and it also reduces the load on language. You can certainly translate these tools into a variety of different languages to offer that, but the more that you can use visual, the more people will be moving along quickly and enjoying the experience, and that goes a great deal into going beyond the usual suspects. Making the experience fun. Let's face it, if something feels like homework, people are just not going to do it. They're not going to finish. They're certainly not going to share it with their friends on social networks. So creating a fun experience really is a great way to create something that goes viral in your community. It's important as well that the tool collects demographic information so you can see who you're engaging and potentially who you're missing in your outreach. So you can target specifically different populations, and you can see this result. There was quite a balance achieved of ethnicity in this particular engagement. We're seeing this more and more, that people are looking at who they're engaging and maybe tracking it along the way. And if there's any gaps in participation, producing some go-to-them type activities where you're going out into the community, specifically targeting underrepresented populations, and having events like the ones that these pictures here are from the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan, where they had a number of really interesting events where they went out to the community and targeted people that were probably not otherwise participating, and that in that way they got that diverse mix that they were going for in their goals. Number 3 is informed input. Now there's a lot of design elements around MetroQuest that are really important here, because MetroQuest is the only tool that online engagement tool that was specifically designed for the planning context. We have a number of different screen types that have been basically custom created for those kind of questions and the interactivity, but also communicating the trade-offs and constraints and all of the other things that are involved in the planning process, and making it feel fun to learn about the different options and participate. So what we have done with MetroQuest is we've created these little, what we call micro learning moments, where we turn things into a bit of a short game. It takes a couple of minutes, maybe a minute and a half to do a game where you're, for example, balancing a budget. So you're learning about constraints, you're learning about different funding options, and you're trying to kind of play the game that planners are required to play, which is to make ends meet and to operate under a series of constraints. The other types of screens, now we've got, as you can see from the previous slide, a whole bunch of them, but the scenario screen shows people the outcomes of different possible futures that they can choose from. It shows them how they score based on their own priorities, positively or negatively, and then it invites people to rate the scenarios, to ask, how would you rate this particular option, knowing that it has both pros and cons. And so it's another way of kind of embedding a little bit of empathy in the process, where people understand that there's no easy choices here. There's different levels of pros and cons to each of the options, and it's important that come across so you can trust the information coming back. And there's a whole variety of ways, like little coin games, which are fun to do, allocating coins to different priority areas, but it's also communicating in a subtle way there's a limit to the amount of resources that are available. How would you allocate them? And so again, building that empathy around some of the challenges associated with planning, it creates a more mature conversation with the community that generates, we think, much more meaningful results. And the last category is about the quantifiability of the results. Quantifiable results are so important, particularly when you're engaging 5,000 or more, as in the strategic mobility plan for Austin, or 15,000 in the case of the Fairfax County. It's so important because you're collecting literally hundreds of thousands of pieces of data, that they're not all just comments that are just kind of very difficult to summarize. We've really focused on making sure that the primary source of input coming in is quantifiable, so you can graph it and map it. So each screen that we've designed has both a quantifiable element and an option to provide additional comments, so you can get some color commentary on why people are preferring, for example, different elements of a visual preference survey. They rate them, but they also are invited to comment, and so you can look at the results from that using the dashboards, and you can not only see how something was rated, which ones were rated more positively, but for the ones that were rated, for example, negatively, why were they not preferred? What were the comments like? And so you can kind of dive into the results and get that color commentary, but also come away with a graphable result where you can say, these were the preferred options and here's why. So now over to a short demonstration. I want to talk about the process of coming up with a survey and coming up with the results, just to make that a little bit more clear. There's essentially 3 steps. The first step is a setup step where you're given a range of options to choose from in terms of screen types, and you're allowed to populate them with your own images and words and so forth. And then you go into the engage phase where you're putting it out to the community, publicizing it in a variety of ways, and monitoring the results and seeing who you're engaging, monitoring it along the way, maybe promoting it in different ways if there's any underrepresented audiences that you want to focus on. And then at the end, you go into the analysis phase where you're looking at the results and you're cutting and pasting, or you're using the detailed results in spreadsheets to really dive into what we've learned and presenting it in your presentations, but also in your planning documents. So I want to just toggle over now to a browser where I've got a few of those steps highlighted here, so I can just go over them quickly. So the first step, the setup step, you're presented with a range of different options of screen types, and you can mix and match these depending on which phase you're at in your planning process. You might want to start with a priority screen or a screen where people put markers on maps to identify what the priority issues are, and so you can basically mix and match these different micro learning moments, we call them, or survey types in one site. And then once you've picked the options that you need to pick, then you can customize them depending on your own needs. And so, for example, the priority ranking screen here, if we wanted to, for example, change this picture to be a different type of picture, we could just do so like this. So I want a different picture in there, and I want obviously to write a description. You can type it in there. So it's literally as easy as that to kind of set these up to be your local priorities and local issues and images. Then when you're ready to launch and you've got your site all together and you've picked your screens and populated them with whatever material you want, you're ready to go to the public. And so let me just show you those 3 case studies that I talked about, starting with the Fairfax County process that engaged 15,000 people. Which is an incredible result for a corridor study. And I really like the way they've structured this to make it easy for people to understand what's a relatively difficult topic. So the first screen just gives people a little bit of information on what the process is all about and some key links where they can find more information, but really just encourages people to begin. And the first question takes people through a series of questions about key corridors that are being planned and asks them about some simple options around those corridors and which ones need more support in different types of capacities. And then they opened it right up to, because this was in the early phases of the process, what sort of additional needs are there in terms of either pedestrian or bicycle or vehicle travel, what some of those needs are. And then when they get to this step, they're actually looking at particular corridor designs, which they can learn more about and either agree or disagree. So a little quick visual preference survey, and then some information about how people use the corridor. And as I mentioned, over 100,000 data points came in from over 15,000 people. So a massive amount of engagement on a process that was really, these sort of things struggle to get 15 people at a public meeting, and so to have that level of input was really quite groundbreaking. In the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan, with their goals to increase the quality of the engagement, but also the diversity of the engagement, I think they did a really great job offering this particular survey in both Spanish and English. And they allowed people to rank their priorities, which is a really great question to start with because it puts people kind of in the driver's seat, lets people know that it's about them and their priorities. And I really like the way that they presented different scenarios for how the strategic mobility plan could play itself out. And they showed them the pros and cons of those different options based on their own priorities. So you can see this one performs very well on many of my top priorities. There is a trade-off, and so you can learn more about that by investigating the scenario. And so when I say, I like this scenario, I'm doing so fully aware that there's both pros and cons. And so there's a lot of information baked into it. And of course, because their process was so focused on engaging the diverse population of the city of Austin, they asked some really important survey questions at the end about your ethnicity, age, gender, and so forth. And they used that to adjust the engagement process as it went along to target at some of those events that I showed you pictures of, to fill in some of those gaps. And as a result of those events and this, I think, fairly entertaining and informative survey, they were able to match the actual demographics of the city of Austin almost perfectly. This last one, the Belmont Bridge, as I mentioned, it was a controversial project that was going on for 15 years, where there was a lot of infighting about what was needed. And I think they did a great job putting together this survey to break that logjam that they were experiencing. So the first interactive screen, engage people in priorities. So taking a step back from the options that people thought the city was pushing on the public, it just sort of said, let's take a step back and let's look at what your priorities are for the bridge replacement. And so they did a great job of characterizing these different options here, and it really set the tone of let's figure out what is important to you, the public, in achieving for this bridge replacement. And then it transitioned to, okay, but there's some trade-offs that we need to be aware of. So for example, for mobility, is it more important that this bridge serve moving cars or moving people? Where is your priority there? And gives people a little bit of insight into the fact that there are some priority choices, that we're not going to be able to accomplish everything with a specific design of the bridge. Is it more important that this be an iconic bridge, or that it complement what's around it? So there's these issues are actually being faced by designers and planners, but they're not necessarily on the minds of the public. And it really changed the tone of the conversation. So the public started to realize that there were critical choices, and it wasn't obvious which of these choices to make. And so it engaged a very large number of people in weighing in on those choices. And then I loved how they got specific towards the end, where they actually gave people specific visual preference survey questions about design elements. How should we approach landscaping? What kind of lighting do you prefer? How should public spaces be managed? And what about street design? All of these issues invited the public to kind of co-create the design. And they pulled in, for this screen alone, over 34,000 different images were rated. So a massive amount of participation that came in. And as a result of that, they were able to break this logjam. And as I promised at the end, I'll talk about that. And then so that, that's kind of covers the engage phase. And then at the end, once you've got your results, it's important to along the way to be monitoring the participation, as I mentioned. And to figure out, who you're engaging, who you're missing. But then at the end, hopefully you achieve a result such as this. So here's the results of a particular survey. And you can see that from an age perspective, and I can go down the different demographic categories that are tracked here. But this one achieved very nicely balanced participation across age groups. Now, it's often a misnomer that that online engagement, tends to favor particular demographics, and that is less and less true all the time. Particularly when a survey is designed to be very easy and fun to do without requiring a great deal of knowledge about the planning issues, that kind of embeds education in a fun way. The participation can be extremely broad. Of course, you can map out how your engagement is going along. So you can see this is a kind of a typical pattern where over the course of this engagement period, we've got a slow increase here where things are catching on, and then they really start to take off. And there's a number of different events here where there's been some really great promotional activity, and you can see the end result. And of course, for any of the questions, you can just take the results and cut and paste them right into your planning documents to demonstrate to decision makers how people weighed in on these, or you can of course download the Excel spreadsheets to do your own detailed analysis if you wish. So with that, I just wanted to show you these three phases to kind of demystify it, because normally in our webinars, we don't have any kind of time to get into any of those specifics, and we got asked a lot about a little bit more insight into what that kind of feels like in the setup process and the engagement process and the analysis at the end. And highlighting those three local government case studies that were each trying to solve for different issues. So with respect to the different phases, I mentioned that at the start, you might want to engage people in ranking priorities or marking issues. And as you move throughout the planning process, you might then want to get people to select projects or rate scenarios. You can see that the different types of engagement may change as you move throughout the planning process. And then at the end, you might want to rate images or identify preferences, get a little bit more specific. In terms of, as I mentioned, MetroQuest is the only tool really that has been designed particularly around the planning process. All kinds of different transportation and land use, urban planning have been kind of our guiding force as we've been designing the tool. So you'll see each of the screen types is kind of suited to those kind of questions and the way those kind of play out for communicating trade-offs and options, and then collecting information coming back, with the goal of doing all of these 4 things simultaneously. So you can see now, hopefully, why MetroQuest is the way it is, because we are designing around, achieving the broadest engagement, but also making sure that the information coming back is trustworthy and informed and quantifiable. I was just thrilled to see the result of this particular project, because it was suffering from the controversy that I was talking about. And you can see that after 15 years, they finally approved the design for this process, because I think that they achieved such great public engagement. And this newspaper article actually says councillors ruled unanimously that the city had collected sufficient citizen feedback. In the past, they just were engaging the kind of the usual suspects, and they were just not having a great deal of success moving this forward. So with that thoughtful engagement, I think they did a great job. As a result of the way MetroQuest is delivered, because it's delivered by annual subscription, the cost associated with engagement can be extremely low. And that's one of the reasons why we're recommending that people kind of take a digital first approach, where they engage people online and then figure out who they're missing and use the more resource intensive activities like workshops, public meetings, to target underrepresented or difficult to reach populations, as opposed to the opposite, where you have a bunch of workshops and discover that you didn't have the diversity that you'd like. So with the annual subscription, it's possible to achieve a great deal of engagement fairly cost effectively. So before I open it up for Q&A, I just wanted to invite you to weigh in on a polling question. What additional information would you like? So there's so many people on the line, and I know that you might all have different reasons for wanting to register for this webinar. So I want to just invite you to weigh in on what additional information can we help you with in your journey to investigating how you can improve your public engagement. So would you like more information on pricing for MetroQuest, which involves a little bit of a conversation, clarification on any capabilities that you would like to have in your online engagement that you're not sure about? We're happy to provide that. Would you like a discussion just in general about what your public engagement goals are and whether or not we can help or we can recommend something else to achieve those goals? Or if there's a case study that you would like about people who have had success, agencies that have had success using online engagement and how that might have occurred. So I'll give you a few more seconds to weigh in on that. Thank you for that. I'm also going to share with you in the follow-up an ebook that we created, particularly around facing contention, because I know that a lot of local government projects are fairly contentious, and we have created, in partnership with the International Association for Public Participation, 21 tips to detoxify public engagement, particularly around projects that are contentious. So we'll share that with you in the follow-up as a thank you for spending some time with us today. Because our webinars are starting to get fairly popular, and we're getting close to our limit. I wanted to give you an opportunity to pre-register for our next webinar, which is going to focus on the North Carolina Department of Transportation and what they have learned about emerging transportation technologies like autonomous vehicles and Uber and Lyft and all of the technologies that are changing the way transportation happens. So that's going to be on Wednesday, July 17th. So I'm just going to give you an opportunity to answer a question now, whether or not you would like us to save you a seat for that webinar. So if you're interested in that topic, please let us know now. So we've got a whole bunch of people that are interested in that. That's great. I'm happy to save you a seat for that. Now it's over to you. So if there's any information that you would like or that I didn't cover, questions that you have about what I presented, don't hesitate to type them into the question box now. I will get to as many of those as possible. And for those that we're not able to address by the end of our time today, I'll get back to you individually. So let's just take a look at some of your questions here. We've already got quite a few that have come in. All right, so a couple of comparison questions. So here's a question: how does MetroQuest compare with SurveyMonkey? Okay, so this is a question that we get quite often, because obviously SurveyMonkey or other kind of multiple choice based online survey tools are available, and really the niche that MetroQuest feels is really around the planning context, because planning deals with complex topics and struggles often to get sufficient participation. And so what we've done with MetroQuest is we've tried to make planning engagement a little bit more informative, so you're collecting informed feedback, but we've also made it kind of fun and visual so it doesn't feel like homework, so more people will participate. And so we've really done a number of things, particularly around government agencies' challenges associated with engagement around planning, specifically in MetroQuest, to meet those needs. Whereas a multiple choice survey tool can tend to be a little bit dry for people, and not very interesting, but also maybe not informative enough to collect information on some complex questions that planners are dealing with. So we felt like something else was needed than a multiple choice survey tool. So MetroQuest is really, excuse me, filling that void. Another question here, comparison question. How do online surveys differ from other engagement options? Okay, so fairly quickly, oftentimes other engagement options, the most popular ones, social media, and kind of like what we would consider to be an online forum. So I'll talk just briefly about those and how they compare. So social media is a great way to amplify your message, to get the word out there. You can use its advertising platforms to target specific populations by demographic. So there's all kinds of great ways with social media to get the word out there. But it's not a very good place to collect information from the public. It tends to be very public. People are intimidated to kind of share their views online, and it can kind of look like the end of a magazine article online, where it's just people fighting with each other, and it tends to be a fairly intimidating place for people to share their views. And it tends to collect a whole bunch of text, people's opinions about this and that, but not very structured information coming back. So we feel that the role of social media is really to amplify the messages out and to have people go to complete a survey that's more structured and going to collect feedback, but also to raise issues and to have a general discussion, but not as a primary source of information coming in. Similarly, with online forums, they tend to be kind kind of the usual suspects that are willing to sign up and register for an online forum, and it tends to be fairly a shallow place with very few people providing most of the commentary and going back and forth with each other. And if you're hesitant at all to participate, you're going to look at some of the dialogue on online forums and maybe be intimidated or be feeling like you don't want to share your views because somebody might call you out on it and so forth. So it tends to be a fairly uncomfortable place for a lot of people, and it's probably why online forums tend to engage fairly few people, kind of the usual suspects. And so what we've done with MetroQuest is to try to create, as I mentioned, that safe place. Online forums are useful for those people that do want to have that discussion. Maybe they can learn from each other, maybe you can share some information, but in order to collect broad feedback from a diverse population, we feel that something that feels a little bit safer is important. Okay, so other questions here. So how long does it take to put together a MetroQuest survey? Well, in terms of I showed, kind of the populating, dragging the image in and the words and that sort of thing. So really, though that process of compiling the survey can be done in a matter of hours. How long you spend as the agency talking about which pictures and reviewing it internally can vary. So you might want to allocate a week or two to have other people review it and approve it, but the actual mechanics of it is dragging and dropping pictures and typing in text, so fairly quick. So how can you reach rural populations with poor internet connections? Okay, so this is a great question because we have found that in remote communities, it's even more important to provide options for people who might not have access to the internet on a regular basis. Things like local community centers or libraries have been a great way to for example, in a library, there's always a welcome screen on all of the computers in the library, and we've had great success inviting libraries to make the MetroQuest survey your welcome screen, so everybody has an opportunity to weigh in. And there's a variety of different ways that you can kind of take your survey to them. So we've had lots of clients that have had basically a knapsack filled with 6 or 8 iPads, and they've gone to community events where people are going to be, so they don't need to have their own internet connection or their own device. You can set up a table at any particular community event and kind of go to them as an option. Many people these days will have the internet in rural communities, but for those that don't, it's important to provide them with an option that's easy. So great question. We have time for maybe one more. Can an annual subscription be used for multiple projects and unlimited surveys? So yes, that is the way it works with MetroQuest. You can, with your annual subscription, you can use MetroQuest on an unlimited number of projects. So we've certainly had, lots of communities that have done many surveys throughout the year and dramatically lowered their per project costs quite dramatically. So there's no upper limit, and it's really been a game changer offering unlimited subscription, annual subscription, because otherwise people tend to kind of save online tools for those big projects, and we think that some of the small projects are the ones that need it the most. So that is unfortunately all the questions we have time for, because I wanted to honor our commitment to finish on time. But thank you very much for anybody else who has questions that we weren't able to get to. Please stay tuned. We will follow up with you individually. And for those of you who are AICP members, we're pleased to be co-sponsored by the American Planning Association and offering certification maintenance credits. There you can see the link, but you don't need to copy it down because we will be happy to share the link with you in the follow-up material. And for all of you who have spent now 45 minutes with us today, thank you so much for your time. It would be great to hear from you in the future if there's any additional questions that come up that we can help with on your journey to improving your public engagement. So thanks very much and take care. We'll see you soon.